Hi guys, it's Ria and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be discussing Pablo Picasso's birth chart. And it's such an interesting case to study because Pablo Picasso, he's a legend. He changed art forever. And his paintings are, inspiring many artists. And I don't think this is about to change anytime soon. He completely changed art forever. He changed the world in a way. And what's really interesting is that if you look at his chart, so I'm going to pull up his chart here. If you look at his chart, he's got 4 debilitated planets. Okay, like Venus is debilitated in Virgo in the 3rd house. Sun is debilitated in Libra. Moon is debilitated in Scorpio. Rahu is debilitated in Scorpio, although I personally don't use the exaltation and debilitation points of the nodes, but some astrologers do. And even if you do, even the nodes are debilitated. Saturn is debilitated in Aries. And, the planets that are not debilitated are still in bad dignity. Mercury is not in its debilitation point, but it's in Scorpio, ruled by Mars. So it's in an enemy sign, it's in bad dignity, plus it's with the moon. Mercury and moon are not friends. Jupiter is not debilitated, but it's with K2. Okay, any planet that's with K2 going to be very difficult. Plus it's in an enemy sign. It's in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Jupiter and Venus are enemies, and although they are both benefic planets, they are both gurus, they have completely different philosophies. Venus is rajasic, and Jupiter is sattvic. So Jupiter is concerned with doing the right thing, and Venus is concerned with being happy, and they're both very important. But I'll get into that in another video, dissecting each planet. But anyway, Jupiter in Taurus is in bad dignity. It might be good for finances because Jupiter is expansion and Taurus is the sign of security and finances. But other than that, it's bad for everything else that Jupiter represents. Jupiter cannot function properly in Taurus. Finally, we have Mars. And again, Mars is in an enemy sign in Gemini in the 12th house. Mars and Mercury are big enemies. So both Mars and Mercury are exchanging signs. So as you can see, if you looked at this chart and you didn't know it was Pablo Picasso, you would probably think this is the chart of a criminal, right? I've shown this chart to many astrologers without telling them whose chart it was. And no one could guess that it was Pablo Picasso. So this is why I want to dive into it today. It's not an obvious one, but still we can see that he is a true artist. We can see that from his chart. Okay, first of all, the node and 2 other planets are in the 5th house. So when there are 3 planets in a house, that's a lot of energy in one house. It shows that the house is going to be prominent. The person's going to put a lot of focus on that house. And so not only there are 3 planets, but there's the node, Rahu. Rahu is very expansive. So it's almost like having 4 planets in the 5th house. Right, so there's a lot of energy. And what does the 5th house represent? The 5th house is the house of arts, of creativity and skill. okay? And he was definitely a creative person. He innovated in his paintings. He painted things that people have never seen before. And what's interesting to note here is the Lord of the fifth house, the dispositor of Rahu, Moon, and Mercury, is Mars, because they are in Scorpio. And Mars is in the 12th house. So this links very strongly the 5th house and the 12th house. 5th house of arts, creativity, and the 12th house of imagination, of otherworldly, of dreaminess, of very eccentric vision. It's otherworldly, right? And we can see that through his paintings. We can see the influence of the 12th house in his paintings. He painted things that were, he actually invented the style of surrealism. He was one of the first to paint like this. And so we can definitely see the 12th house influence in his art. Another indication that he's an artist is Venus. So Venus is the Karaka for art and creativity, and it's in the 3rd house of skill, especially manual skills with the hands. So 3rd house is really communication and skill and how one expresses themselves. And it's specifically skills with the hands. So Venus being in the 3rd house shows that the way that Pablo expressed himself was through art, obviously. And Venus in the 3rd house gives him a lot of skill also in everything related to Venus. Beauty and creativity and art. Now there's an important principle here, and it's called Jiva Karaka, ajeeva Karaka. So it means that when there are debilitated planets or difficult aspects in the chart, it can really impact the living significances, like relationships, like other people in our lives. But the non-living significances of the house can still thrive, like career, money, success, fame, all of these things. And we can see that in Pablo's life, you know, with his debilitated Venus and his debilitated moon. You know, we can see he had very tumultuous relationships. You know, his paintings of crying women were inspired by Dora, which was one of his wives or mistresses, if I'm not mistaken. She was a mistress. I mean, there were so many women in his life, and 2 of them committed suicide. Another one had a mental breakdown. You know, he kept attracting deranged women, and we can see that from his debilitated Venus. You know, Venus is the Karaka for women. It is the significator of women, and his relationships were not easy at all. He was portrayed as a womanizer in some texts written by his granddaughter, and I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just going to say that he had multiple relationships and multiple affairs. He had a secret marriage at some point. We can also see secret marriages and affairs through his chart. There are 2 indications of secret affairs in his chart. The first indication is the 7th Lord. So the 7th Lord is Saturn, because the 7th house is in Capricorn. It's also the Lord of the 8th house, because 8th house is in Aquarius. So the 7th house and 8th house are linked. And 7th house is the house of committed relationships, partnerships, marriage. And 8th house is the house of sex, is the house of instability. It's also the house of secrets. So So this linking of the 8th house with the 7th house brings secrets in his relationships. And the second indication is the 5th house. Now, while the 7th house represents committed relationships, long-term partnerships, the 5th house represents romance. This is why the 5th house comes before the 7th house, because first there's the honeymoon phase, there's the romance, you fall in love with the other person, and then you get into a committed relationship. That's the natural order of things. So that's what the 5th house represents. It's the house of romance, of that fun honeymoon phase. And Pablo Picasso was known to have multiple affairs with many different women. So not only long-term relationships and, marriages and mistresses, but as well as multiple romances. And Rahu in the 5th house is expansion, and Rahu is the head with no body. So it's always hungry, right? So we can see that through this aspect. We can also see that through the moon in his 5th house, and Mercury. Mercury is the player. Mercury is a very playful planet, and moon is where we feel safe, where we feel secure, what makes us feel at home. And so he got a sense of security through his art, obviously. That's what the 5th house represents. But it also represents romances. So conquering different women kind of gave him an emotional security. And Rahu is always hungry. So he always had that urge. And Mercury is the planet of being playful. So, that combination in the 5th house definitely shows a player or a womanizer. Although I don't want to call him that, because those are just, accounts from different people. But I'm just commenting on his chart. So as I was about to post this video, I realized I forgot to mention a very important detail about secret affairs in his chart. And it is so obvious, guys. So there are 3 indications of secret affairs, not 2. So the third indication that I didn't mention in the video is Mars. Okay, so not only there's a lot of planetary energies in the 5th house of romance with, Rahu, Moon, Mercury combination that I already mentioned, but the dispositor of the 5th house is Mars. Out of all planets, it's Mars. Mars is the planet of energy, where we exert our energy. And the 12th house is the house of secret affairs. So the secret affairs of the 12th house is coming into his romances in the 5th house. And out of out of all signs, Mars is in Gemini. Gemini is the most playful sign out of the 12 zodiac signs. Gemini is the most playful sign. So, we can really see this energy being amplified. The fact that he really was playful about his romances, but very intense at the same time, because it's Mars we're talking about. And and the 5th house is in Scorpio as well, which Scorpio is a very intense sign. So we can see that through many different aspects. So that was it. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.